"That little girl is not his daughter," Naomi Carter said, and the airport kept moving as if she had whispered into a storm. Officer Daniel Whitaker didn't even turn his head at first. He stood beneath the bright security lights of Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport, one hand resting near his radio, his polished black shoes planted on the tile like the floor belonged to him. Around them, rolling suitcases clicked over the seams, flight announcements crackled above Gate E-17, and hundreds of people hurried toward places where they were expected, wanted, believed. Naomi pointed across the security lane toward a tall white man in a navy travel jacket, his fingers wrapped around the wrist of a small blonde girl in a pink hoodie. The child was walking too carefully. Not resisting. Not crying. Just silent in that terrible way Naomi knew too well. "Sir, please," Naomi said, keeping her voice low so she wouldn't scare the girl. "Look at her face. She's terrified." Whitaker finally looked at Naomi, but not where she was pointing. His eyes went to her faded brown coat, her canvas tote bag, the crease in her boarding pass, the tiredness under her eyes from a night spent caring for somebody else before catching a 6:10 a.m. flight. He saw a black woman standing out of line. He saw inconvenience. He saw a problem he thought he already understood. "Ma'am," he said, cold and controlled, "unless you have proof, stop harassing passengers." A man behind Naomi sighed loudly. Someone muttered, "Here we go." The words touched her back like cold fingers, but Naomi did not move. If you believe stories like this deserve to be heard, subscribe and stay with Naomi until the end, because what happens next will make everyone in that airport question what they ignored. Naomi had spent 9 years as a child welfare caseworker in Baltimore, and fear had a language. It lived in shoulders held too high, in small hands that did not swing freely, in eyes that searched for exits without daring to ask for one. The girl near the gate had all of it. When the men tugged her closer to the boarding sign for a flight to Toronto, Naomi saw the child turn her head just enough to look back. Their eyes met for half a second. Naomi mouthed one word, "Help." The girl's lips trembled, but no sound came. Then, as the men leaned down and whispered something into her ear, she shaped 2 words so small Naomi almost missed them. Not mom. Not please. Not even help. The girl mouthed a name. Grace Whitaker. Naomi's breath caught. She turned back to the officer. "Ask her why she said Grace Whitaker." For the first time, Daniel Whitaker's face changed. Not much. Just a flicker around the eyes, a tightening in his jaw, as if Naomi had reached into a locked drawer inside his chest and touched something buried there. "What did you say?" he asked. Naomi stepped closer, careful, steady, refusing to let the crowd swallow the child whole. That little girl just mouthed the name Grace Whitaker. The airport noise seemed to thin around them. The officer's radio hissed. A suitcase wheel squeaked. Behind the glass, the man in the navy jacket guided the girl toward the boarding line, his smile too calm, his hand too firm. Daniel stared at Naomi now, really stared, but trust did not come into his eyes. Anger did. "Don't use that name," he said, his voice dropping. "You don't know what you're talking about." Naomi felt the old familiar weight settle over her, the weight of being seen as trouble before being heard as human. But she also saw the child look back one more time, and that was enough. "Maybe I don't know everything," Naomi said softly, "but I know when a child is begging without words." Naomi Carter had not planned to become the woman standing between a child and a plane. She had planned to sit quietly in seat 22A, land in Chicago before noon, and make it to a family court hearing with enough time to wash her face in the courthouse restroom and pretend she had slept. Her tote bag held a folder of references, a paperback book with a cracked spine, a bag of cinnamon crackers for the flight, and a photograph of a 12-year-old boy named Isaiah who had been waiting 8 months for someone to call him family. That was why she was flying. Not for vacation. Not for business. For a boy who had stopped asking adults to keep promises because too many of them had broken too many. Naomi knew that kind of silence. She had spent nearly a decade walking into apartments where children smiled too quickly, schools where bruised feelings hid behind perfect attendance, and hospital rooms where small voices told the truth only after everyone else left. She had learned not to trust volume. Some children screamed because they were safe enough to be heard. Others went quiet because quiet was the only protection they had left. That was what she had seen in the little girl at gate E17. The stillness. The careful steps. The way her hand hung at her side until the man's fingers closed around it again. Naomi had been wrong before in small ways, but never about that kind of fear. Officer Daniel Whitaker stood in front of her now, blocking her view with the flat certainty of a man who had already decided the story. His uniform was sharp, his nameplate bright, his expression carved from procedure. Behind him, 2 other officers watched with the tired impatience of people who wanted the morning to return to normal. "Ma'am, I am going to ask you one more time to step away from the lane," Daniel said. Naomi looked past his shoulder. The boarding line had started moving. The man in the navy jacket handed a document to the gate agent, smiling politely, his posture relaxed in the way people trusted by the world often were. The girl stood beside him, swallowed by the noise of wheels, voices, and overhead announcements. Naomi's throat tightened. "I was a child welfare worker," she said. "I know what I saw." Daniel's eyes narrowed, not with curiosity, but with warning. "Were you assigned to that child?" "No." "Do you know her name?" "No." "Do you know that man?" "No." Each answer seemed to build a wall between them. Daniel exhaled through his nose, almost a laugh but colder. "Then what you have is a feeling." Naomi felt heat rise beneath her skin, not from shame, but from the old exhaustion of being asked to prove her humanity before anyone would consider her judgment. "A feeling kept a 5-year-old alive in East Baltimore when nobody else believed him," she said quietly. "A feeling found a little girl hiding in a laundry room after 3 adults said she had run away. A feeling is not nothing when it comes from years of listening." For half a second, one of the younger officers looked at her differently. Daniel did not. He glanced toward the gate, then back at Naomi, and the mask slipped just enough for something personal and wounded to show through. "And what does Grace Whitaker have to do with any of that?" he asked. Naomi heard the change in him. The name was not just a name. It was a locked door. "I told you," she said. The child mouthed it. Children do not mouth random missing persons' names to strangers in airports. His voice was lower now, sharper around the edges. Naomi stared at him. "Missing persons?" The question landed before he could pull the words back. Daniel's jaw tightened, and in that silence Naomi understood more than he wanted her to. Grace Whitaker was not a code in the system. She was not just a record. She was his grief. The boarding line moved again. The man in the navy jacket guided the girl closer to the jet bridge. Naomi stepped sideways, trying to see around Daniel. He moved with her, blocking her path. "You are not going near that child," he said. Naomi's voice softened, which somehow made it stronger. "Officer, whatever that name means to you, do not let your pain make you deaf." Daniel's face hardened instantly, as if tenderness itself had offended him. "That is enough." He signaled to the officers beside him. One came to Naomi's right, the other to her left, polite but firm, their hands open, their bodies creating a corridor away from the gate. People stared openly now. A woman in a red scarf pulled out her phone. A teenager whispered to his friend. Naomi did not fight. She knew how quickly a black woman's urgency could be renamed aggression by people who had never been asked to fear quietly. So she lifted both hands where everyone could see them and kept her eyes on the child until a moving wall of uniforms carried her away. Just before the security door closed behind her, Naomi saw the girl turn once more. No tears. No scream. Only 2 small hands pressed together at her chest, like a prayer no one had taught her to finish. The security room smelled faintly of burnt coffee, floor cleaner, and warm electronics. Naomi sat in a metal chair beneath a buzzing fluorescent light while the airport moved beyond the wall without her, each announcement muffled into a language of departures she could no longer reach. Her boarding pass lay on the table in front of her, corners bent from where one officer had taken it from her hand and dropped it like evidence. Daniel Whitaker stood across from her with his arms folded, trying to look calm, but Naomi could see the pulse in his neck. The name had followed them into the room. Grace Whitaker. It sat between them heavier than any accusation. On the far wall, a row of security monitors showed different angles of the terminal. Gate E17 appeared in the upper right screen, small and blue-tinted, the boarding line curling like a slow-moving ribbon. The man in the navy jacket was still there. The little girl stood at his side, nearly hidden behind a carry-on bag with a bright yellow tag. Naomi leaned forward. "She is still at the gate," she said. Daniel did not look at the screen. "You need to stop. Look at her body language." "I said stop." His voice cracked through the small room, not loud enough to be called yelling, but sharp enough that the younger officer near the door shifted his weight. Naomi turned back to Daniel, studying him the way she used to study parents across folding tables in county offices, trying to find the place where anger ended and fear began. Daniel was not just protecting procedure. He was protecting a wound. His hair was trimmed close, his jaw clean-shaven, his uniform pressed so perfectly it felt like armor. Everything about him said control. But control was not the same as peace. "You said missing persons," Naomi said carefully. Grace was missing. Daniel's eyes cut toward her. "You do not get to say her name." "Then who does?" The question landed softly, but it landed. Daniel looked away first. Through the glass strip in the door, travelers passed in blurred colors, free to keep moving because no one had decided they looked suspicious. Naomi lowered her voice. "I am not trying to hurt you. I am trying to help that child." Daniel gave a short, bitter breath. "You walked up to a federal checkpoint and accused a man of kidnapping based on a glance. Based on training. You are not on duty. Children in danger do not wait for office hours." The younger officer looked at the monitor again. His nameplate read Ruiz. He was maybe 26, with tired eyes and a face not yet hardened into certainty. Naomi noticed him noticing. Daniel noticed too. "Ruiz," Daniel said, "do not get pulled into this." Officer Ruiz straightened. "Sir, the kid does look uncomfortable." Daniel turned slowly. "A lot of children look uncomfortable at airports." "Yes, sir, but she has not spoken once. Not to the gate agent, not to the men, not even when he gave her the water bottle." Daniel's face tightened. He finally glanced at the monitor, but only for a second, as if looking longer would cost him something. Naomi followed his gaze and saw the men crouch beside the girl. From the camera angle, his smile looked patient, almost kind. But his hand stayed on the handle of her backpack, keeping her close. "Pull the passenger record," Naomi said. Daniel's eyes snapped back to her. "You do not give orders here." "Then make it your idea." Silence. The fluorescent light hummed overhead. Somewhere beyond the wall, a boarding chime rang, bright and ordinary, the kind of sound that meant nothing until it meant a door was closing. Ruiz moved toward the computer without waiting for permission. Daniel's shoulders stiffened, but he did not stop him. Naomi watched the monitor as Ruiz typed. The man in the navy jacket stood again and checked his watch. The girl looked toward the terminal one more time, searching faces that did not search back. Naomi pressed her fingers together under the table to keep them from trembling. She thought of Isaiah waiting in Chicago, of the folder in her tote, of every child who had ever learned that adults could look straight at them and still not see. "Passenger name is Martin Reed," Ruiz said. "Traveling with minor, Lily Bennett. Document scanned as valid." Daniel's expression hardened with relief, as if the paperwork had rescued him from doubt. But Ruiz kept reading, slower now. "There is a note on the file. Manual override. At check-in. Birth certificate image is unclear. Agent flagged it, then cleared it." Naomi looked at Daniel. "A clear lie does not need an override." Daniel opened his mouth, but before he could answer, the monitor showed the gate agent lifting the microphone. The final boarding call had begun. The final boarding call moved through the room like a fuse. Naomi felt it first in her chest, then in the hard edge of the table under her palms. On the monitor, the gate agent's mouth formed the words no one in the security room could hear clearly, but everyone understood. "Last call. Last chance." The men using the name Martin Reed bent toward Lily Bennett and said something close to her ear. Lily nodded once, too quickly, the way frightened children nod when they know the answer is expected before the question is finished. Daniel Whitaker stared at the screen, his face pulled tight between doubt and pride. The scanned documents were still open on the computer. A valid passport. A flight reservation. A birth certificate image too blurry to trust and somehow trusted anyway. Procedure had given him a comfortable answer, and Naomi had given him an uncomfortable truth. He wanted the comfortable one. Naomi could see that. "Officer Whitaker," she said, her voice low, "if that plane door closes, you may never get another clean moment to ask her." Daniel looked at her, anger flashing again because fear had nowhere else to go. "You do not know that." "No," Naomi said. "I know what happens when adults wait until they are certain. Children pay for the delay." Ruiz swallowed and looked from Naomi to Daniel. "Sir, we can request a hold at the gate." 2 minutes. "We do not have to accuse anybody yet." Daniel's hand hovered near his radio, but he did not lift it. The room seemed to shrink around that hesitation. Naomi thought of every report she had ever written, every time someone had asked for more evidence when a child had already used all the courage they had. She rose from the chair. Ruiz stepped forward instinctively, but she lifted one open hand and did not move toward the door. "I am not running," she said. "But I am asking you to look at the child instead of looking at me." Daniel's eyes hardened. "Sit down." Naomi did not. Not defiantly. Not loudly. She simply remained standing, small against the cold light, steady in a room designed to make people feel powerless. "When I was 23, she said, I missed the signs on my first case because the father had the right paperwork, the right job, the right words. Everyone told me I was being emotional. By the time anyone listened, that child had been moved 3 states away. We found him, but he stopped speaking for 6 months. I promised myself I would never confuse calm paperwork with safety again." Daniel said nothing. His jaw worked once, then stilled. On the monitor, Martin Reed handed the boarding passes back to the gate agent. Lily's pink hoodie moved another step closer to the jet bridge. Naomi's voice softened. "You think I am using Grace's name against you? I am not. I am telling you a living child used it to reach you." The sentence changed the air. Daniel's gaze dropped for a fraction of a second to the badge clipped near his chest. Behind the badge, tucked inside the clear plastic sleeve, something pale showed through, the corner of an old photograph. Naomi had noticed it earlier. Now Ruiz noticed too. Daniel turned slightly, as if shielding it from them, but the movement only confirmed what the silence had already said. Grace was not history to him. She was still there, folded behind his authority, carried every day into rooms where he pretended not to bleed. Ruiz's voice came carefully. "Sir, should I call the gate?" Daniel closed his eyes for half a second. When he opened them, he looked at the monitor. Really looked. Lily's shoulders were raised almost to her ears. Her free hand was pressed flat against the side of her leg, fingers spreading and closing as if she were counting something. 3 times. Pause. 3 times again. Naomi saw it and inhaled sharply. "She is signaling," she said. "That is not fidgeting. That is a pattern." Daniel reached for the radio. Then Martin Reed looked directly into the camera. It was brief, just one glance upward, but his expression changed. The easy smile disappeared. He knew. Somehow, he knew the room had started watching back. He tightened his grip on Lily's backpack strap and moved fast toward the jet bridge entrance. Daniel finally raised the radio to his mouth. "Gate E17, hold boarding for passenger Martin Reed and minor Lily Bennett. Do not let them enter the aircraft." Static answered first. Then a voice came through, strained and confused. "Officer, they just passed the scanner. They are entering the jet bridge now." Daniel moved before the sentence ended. Ruiz opened the door, and the airport noise crashed in bright and loud around them. Naomi followed one step behind, her tote bag swinging against her hip, her boarding pass forgotten on the table. Daniel turned sharply. "Stay here." Naomi looked past him toward the gate, where a child was disappearing into the narrow tunnel between one world and another. "No," she said. "She trusted my face first." For once, Daniel did not argue. The terminal seemed longer than it had before, stretched by urgency and the bright, indifferent rhythm of a place built to move people along. Daniel Whitaker cut through the crowd with Ruiz close behind him, one hand raised to keep travelers back, the other pressed to his radio as voices overlapped in short bursts of confusion. Naomi followed at a steady pace, not running, not shoving, but moving with the focused calm of someone who knew panic could frighten a child deeper into silence. At gate E17, the agent stood frozen beside the scanner, her hand still hovering over the keyboard. "I told them to pause," she said, her face pale. "He said the child was anxious and needed to board quickly. He had priority clearance." Daniel's eyes snapped toward the jet bridge. The door was not fully closed yet. Through the narrow gap, Naomi saw movement, the dark shoulder of Martin Reed's jacket, the small flash of Lily's pink hood, the silver curve of the tunnel leading toward the aircraft. "Lock the aircraft door open," Daniel ordered into his radio. "No departure clearance. Hold all crew in place." His voice had changed. The cold certainty was gone. What remained was command sharpened by fear. Naomi stepped closer to the jet bridge entrance, but Daniel lifted his arm in front of her. "Naomi, wait." It was the first time he had used her name. She heard it. So did he. For a breath, both of them stood inside the sound of that small correction. Then a voice came from inside the tunnel. Calm. Polite. Too polished. "Is there a problem, officer?" Martin Reed had stopped halfway down the jet bridge with Lily beside him. His hand was no longer on her wrist, but on the top of her backpack, fingers curved over the fabric like he was simply being protective. Lily stared at the floor. Her sneakers were white with tiny blue stars on the sides. One lace had come undone. Naomi noticed because children noticed who noticed little things. Daniel stepped forward. "Sir, we need to verify your travel documents again." Martin smiled, but the corners of his mouth did not warm. They were already verified. "We are going to miss our flight." "The flight is being held." "For what reason?" Daniel paused. Procedure demanded a clean answer. The truth was Messier. Naomi saw the man's eyes flick past Daniel and land on her. Recognition did not show, but calculation did. He knew she was the crack in the wall. "This is the woman who harassed my daughter," he said, his voice rising just enough for the people at the gate to hear. "She frightened a child and accused me in public. Why is she allowed back here?" The word daughter slid through the tunnel like oil on water. Lily's shoulders tightened. Naomi kept her eyes on the girl, not the men. "Lily," she said softly. Martin's smile disappeared. "Do not speak to her." Daniel turned slightly, a warning in his posture, but Naomi did not raise her voice. "Lily, my name is Naomi. You are not in trouble." The child's chin trembled. She did not look up. Martin gave a small, offended laugh. "This is absurd. She is shy. She gets overwhelmed in airports. I have explained this twice." "Then you will not mind answering a few questions away from the aircraft," Daniel said. Martin's fingers pressed into the backpack fabric. Not hard enough to look alarming to strangers. Just enough for Lily to go still. Naomi saw it. Ruiz saw it too. "Sir," Ruiz said, moving to the side, "please step back toward the gate." Martin's eyes cooled. "I want your supervisor." "You will have one," Daniel said. "After you step back." For a moment, everything held still, the gate agent with her hand over her mouth, the passengers staring from behind the rope, the flight crew waiting at the aircraft door, Lily's loose shoelace resting on the gray jet bridge floor. Then Naomi noticed Lily's fingers moving again at her side. 3 taps. Pause. 3 taps. Pause. A pattern. A message. Naomi crouched slowly, keeping both hands visible. "Lily," she said, "if Grace told you to find someone safe, you found us." The child looked up. Not at Daniel. Not at Ruiz. At Naomi. Her eyes were wet, exhausted, and full of a fear too old for 8 years old. Martin spoke sharply, but still without losing the mask. "Lily, we are leaving." The child did not move. Daniel watched her face, and something inside him seemed to break open without making a sound. He saw at last what Naomi had seen from the beginning. Not a difficult passenger. Not a misunderstanding. A child trying to survive inside politeness. Daniel lowered his voice. Lily, do you know this man? The tunnel air hummed with the aircraft systems. Lily swallowed. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. Martin leaned toward her. Answer carefully. Naomi's gaze never left the child. You do not have to protect anyone but yourself, she whispered. Lily's hand lifted, shaking, and pointed not at Martin's face, but at the navy backpack he carried over one shoulder. Ruiz stepped closer. Martin shifted back half a step. That was enough. Daniel moved between him and the child, not touching, not rushing, only placing his body where his judgment should have been earlier. Lily Bennett, Daniel said gently, come stand with Miss Carter. For one breath, she did not move. Then she slipped from beside Martin and crossed the 2 feet of gray floor as if it were a mile of ocean. When her small hand found Naomi's sleeve, the whole jet bridge seemed to exhale. Daniel looked at Martin Reed, and the shame in his eyes had turned into something steadier. Sir, he said, you are coming with us. The jet bridge did not erupt the way Naomi expected. There was no dramatic shout, no crowd rushing forward, no sudden storm of noise. Instead, everything became strangely quiet. Martin Reed was guided back toward the gate by Daniel and Ruiz while 2 additional officers arrived from the terminal, their radios low, their movements controlled. Lily stayed beside Naomi, one hand curled into the sleeve of her brown coat, her small fingers holding on with the exhausted strength of someone afraid the world might change its mind. Naomi did not ask her questions. Not yet. She simply crouched near the wall of the jet bridge, lowering herself until her eyes were level with the child's. You are safe right now, she said. You do not have to explain anything until you are ready. Lily nodded, but her gaze kept drifting toward the backpack Martin had been carrying. Ruiz noticed and quietly took it aside for inspection with another officer. Daniel stood a few feet away, watching as if the floor beneath him had become unfamiliar. The same men who had blocked Naomi, dismissed her, and dragged the truth into delay now looked at Lily's pale face and could barely hold his own together. The name Grace Whitaker had cracked open something inside him, but Lily's silence had widened it. This was not a memory anymore. This was a child breathing in front of him because someone he had ignored refused to disappear. The gate area behind them had been cleared back several feet. Passengers whispered from a distance, their faces caught between curiosity and guilt. The woman in the red scarf no longer held up her phone. She held it against her chest, eyes lowered, as if she had recorded enough of the wrong thing. The overhead lights reflected on the polished floor in long white strips. Beyond the glass, the aircraft waited with its door open, a machine paused between departure and mercy. A paramedic arrived carrying a folded silver thermal blanket. When she placed it around Lily's shoulders, the girl flinched at first, then relaxed when Naomi touched the edge of the blanket and said, "It is just to keep you warm." Lily looked at her for a long moment. Her lips moved once, but no sound came. Naomi waited. Waiting was a language too. Finally, Lily whispered, "She told me to remember the name." Naomi's heart slowed. Daniel stepped closer without meaning to. "Who did?" he asked, but his voice came out rough, almost afraid of the answer. Lily looked at the old photograph tucked behind his badge sleeve. The corner of Grace's face showed through the plastic, faded by years of sunlight and hands that had touched it too often. "The lady at the house," Lily said. "She said if I ever saw police, say Grace Whitaker. She said somebody would know." Daniel's hand went to the badge as if to cover the picture, then stopped. His fingers hovered there, trembling slightly. Naomi watched him understand that grief had not been sleeping all these years. It had been waiting inside another child's mouth. Ruiz returned with the navy backpack, his face changed. He did not speak in front of Lily. He only gave Daniel a look, then stepped aside. Inside the backpack, they had found several documents with different names, 2 children's sweatshirts that did not match Lily's size, and an old photograph sealed in a plastic sleeve. Daniel took one look at it and went still. Naomi could not see the image clearly, but she saw his reaction. The color left his face, not like shock alone, but like recognition traveling through time. His knees did not buckle. His voice did not break loudly. He simply placed one hand against the wall of the jet bridge and lowered his head. For years, he had carried Grace as a question with no answer. Now the first answer had arrived through the black woman he had refused to hear. Naomi stood slowly, Lily still pressed against her side. She did not say, "I told you so." She did not need to. The silence said it for her. Daniel looked at Naomi, and for the first time there was no uniform in his eyes, no suspicion, no rank, no practiced authority. Only a man facing the cost of his blindness. "Miss Carter," he said softly, each syllable heavy, "I should have listened." Naomi looked at Lily wrapped in silver, then back at him. "Yes," she said. "You should have." The words did not punish him. They did not comfort him either. They simply stood between them, plain and deserved, while the airport continued to hum around a truth that had almost boarded a plane and vanished. Daniel Whitaker did not open the old photograph in the middle of the gate. He could not. Not with Lily watching, not with passengers whispering behind the rope, not with Naomi Carter standing close enough to witness every piece of him come undone. He carried the sealed plastic sleeve into a small family assistance room beside the terminal while Ruiz stayed with the evidence team and another female officer brought Lily a bottle of water with the cap already loosened. Naomi remained with the child because Lily would not let go of her coat. The room was meant for missed connections and medical privacy, but now it felt like the narrow center of two unfinished histories. Beige walls. A square table. A box of tissues. A window facing the runway, where planes lifted into the gray Atlanta morning as if leaving were simple. Daniel sat across from Naomi, the photograph on the table between them. His fingers rested on the edge of it, but he still had not turned it fully toward the light. "Grace disappeared when she was 7, he said, his voice quiet enough that even the air seemed to lean in. "Bus stop outside Marietta. 1998. My mother looked away for less than a minute to help my brother tie his shoe. When she turned back, Grace was gone." Naomi did not interrupt. She had learned that pain speaks in fragments because whole sentences can be too heavy to lift. Daniel swallowed. For years, people said she probably ran off, like 7-year-olds run off from mothers they adore. Then they said maybe a relative took her. Then they stopped saying anything at all. Lily sat beside Naomi, wrapped in the silver blanket, staring at the photograph without touching it. "The lady at the house had hair like that," she whispered. Daniel's hand froze. Naomi turned gently. "You do not have to answer fast, sweetheart." Lily nodded, but her eyes stayed on the picture. She was older. Her hair had gray in it. But she had the same little mark by her eye. Daniel finally pulled the photograph from the plastic sleeve. It was faded, creased at the corner, and more than 20 years old. A little girl in a yellow sweater stood beside a white porch railing, smiling at someone outside the frame. Near her right eye was a tiny crescent-shaped birthmark. Daniel looked at it, then at Lily. "Where did you see her?" Lily's breathing changed. Naomi placed her hand flat on the table, not touching Lily, just offering something steady nearby. "A white house," Lily said. "Far from streets. There were trees. She cleaned the kitchen. She gave me crackers when he was gone." Daniel closed his eyes, and the room tightened around him. The woman was alive. Maybe not free, maybe not safe, but alive enough to pass her own name like a match through darkness. Ruiz opened the door softly and stepped in with a tablet. "Sir," he said, careful with every word, "the name Martin Reed is false. Fingerprint match came back to a sealed investigation from Georgia. Different last name, but same face. He was questioned years ago in connection with 3 missing children cases. One of them was Grace Whitaker." Daniel stood so quickly the chair legs scraped the floor. Lily flinched, and the sound stopped him cold. He looked at her, then slowly sat back down, shame returning to his face in a different form. Naomi saw the struggle in him, the officer wanting to chase the lead, the brother wanting to run back through 28 years, the man finally realizing that his first duty was not speed, but care. "We will find her," Daniel said, not to Naomi, not to Ruiz, but to Lily. His voice was no longer hard. It was a promise trying not to break under its own weight. Lily looked at him for a long time. She said police did not listen before. Daniel's face changed as if those words had entered deeper than any accusation. Naomi looked down at her own hands, remembering the moment at the checkpoint, the way he had looked at her coat before her warning, her skin before her truth. Daniel turned toward Naomi. There was no defense left in him now. "Neither did I," he said. Outside the window, a plane rose into a pale strip of sky. Inside the small room, the name Grace Whitaker was no longer a wound hidden behind a badge. It was a living trail, a child's message, and the beginning of a reckoning that had waited almost 3 decades to be heard. Within 20 minutes, the family assistance room became the quiet center of a much larger machine. Federal agents arrived in plain jackets, airport operations locked down the boarding records, and Ruiz walked in and out with updates he softened before speaking near Lily. Martin Reed was taken to a separate interview room, no longer smiling, no longer surrounded by the easy protection of being believed first. But Naomi stayed where she was, seated beside Lily with one hand resting on the table and the other holding a paper cup of water the child had not yet been able to finish. Daniel Whitaker stood near the window, listening as a federal investigator named Agent Marisol Grant explained what they had found in the backpack. The documents were not only false. They were layered, practiced, built from stolen details and old gaps in systems that had failed children before. One address, hidden inside a folded receipt, pointed to a rural property outside Macon, more than 80 miles south. Daniel's face tightened when he heard it. Naomi saw him look toward the door, ready to move, ready to turn regret into action before it crushed him. Agent Grant saw it too. "Local units are on the way," she said. "You are not leaving this airport until we finish your statement." Daniel opened his mouth, then closed it. Authority had stopped feeling like command. Now it felt like accountability. Across the table, Lily finally spoke. "Will she know I told?" Her voice was smaller than the hum of the air vent. Naomi turned toward her. "She told you because she wanted somebody to know." Lily's eyes filled, but the tears stayed balanced on the edge, bright and stubborn. "She said names can keep people alive." Daniel lowered his head. The words reached him harder than any report. For all those years, Grace's name had been a private memorial tucked behind his badge. He had carried it like proof of love, but Naomi understood something he was only beginning to learn: a name was not meant to be hidden in grief. Sometimes it was meant to be spoken in time to save someone else. Agent Grant received a call and stepped into the hallway. The room went still again. Through the window, baggage carts moved across the tarmac in slow lines. A plane pushed back. From a distant gate, its engines rising into a low, steady sound. Daniel walked to the table and stopped in front of Naomi. He did not stand over her this time. He pulled out the chair across from her and sat down, putting himself at eye level. "Miss Carter," he said, "I owe you more than an apology." Naomi looked at him, tired but steady. Lily leaned against her sleeve, half hidden in the silver blanket. Daniel swallowed. "I looked at you and decided you were the problem before I listened to one word you said. I hid behind procedure because it made my doubt feel professional. But it was not just procedure." He glanced at Lily, then back at Naomi. "It was prejudice. I am sorry." The room did not warm instantly. Apologies did not erase the minutes lost, the humiliation in front of strangers, the way Naomi had been moved away while a child was moved toward danger. Naomi let the silence hold him there, because some silences teach better than comfort. Then she said, "Do not apologize only because I was right. Apologize because I should not have needed to be right to be treated like a person." Daniel nodded once, and this time there was no argument in him. "I understand." Naomi's eyes softened, but only a little. "Understanding is what you do next." Before Daniel could answer, Agent Grant stepped back into the room. Her expression had changed. Careful, but bright at the edges. "They found the property," she said. Daniel stood slowly. Naomi's hand closed around Lily's, gentle and protective. Agent Grant looked at the child first, then at Daniel. "There is a woman there. She is alive." She gave the responding officers one name before she said anything else. Daniel did not move. His face emptied, then filled with something too deep for sound. "Grace," he whispered. Agent Grant nodded. The chair behind him shifted slightly as his hand found the table for balance. Naomi watched him, not with triumph, not with pity, but with the sober mercy of someone who had seen broken systems and still chosen to interrupt one. Lily began to cry then, quietly, into Naomi's coat. Naomi wrapped the silver blanket tighter around her shoulders. Daniel looked at both of them, and the apology he had spoken became too small for the room. For the first time since Naomi had pointed across the security lane, he understood that she had not only saved Lily. She had carried his sister's name across the one place he had been too blind to hear it. The news reached the terminal slowly, not as a celebration, but as a hush that passed from face to face. Grace Whittaker was alive. The words did not make Daniel smile. Not at first. They made him sit down as if the years had finally found their weight. He pressed both hands together on the edge of the table and lowered his head, breathing like a man afraid one wrong movement might wake him from mercy. Across from him, Naomi Carter held Lily close while the silver blanket whispered softly around the child's shoulders. Lily had stopped crying, but her fingers still clung to Naomi's sleeve, the same sleeve she had chosen in the jet bridge when every adult voice around her felt too large to trust. Agent Grant confirmed that Grace was being taken to a hospital outside Atlanta for care and questioning when she was ready. She was weak, confused, and frightened, but she was speaking. She had remembered Daniel. She had remembered the yellow sweater from the photograph. And before the paramedics helped her into the ambulance, she had asked whether the little girl from the airport was safe. That question broke Daniel more gently than grief ever had. He looked at Lily then, really looked at her, not as evidence, not as a witness, but as a child who had carried his sister's name through fear because Grace had placed it in her hands like a lantern. She asked about you, he said softly. Lily looked up from Naomi's coat. Is she mad? Daniel shook his head, and his voice nearly disappeared. No. She is proud of you. Lily closed her eyes, and something in her small face finally loosened. Hours later, when Lily was placed with child protection specialists and a trauma counselor, she let go of Naomi only after Naomi promised to stay until the counselor learned how she liked her water, no ice, straw bent halfway. It was a tiny detail, but Naomi treated it like a sacred instruction. Daniel watched from the doorway, understanding now. That care often looked small only to people who had never needed it to survive. When the room cleared, he walked to Naomi with his badge in one hand and the faded photograph of Grace in the other. I cannot undo what I did at that checkpoint, he said. I cannot undo the way I judged you. Naomi stood near the window, the morning light turning the airport glass pale gold behind her. She looked tired enough to fall asleep standing, but her eyes remained steady. No, she said. You cannot. Daniel nodded. The answer hurt, and it should have. But I can make sure it does not disappear into paperwork. The following week, Daniel filed a formal report that named his own failure clearly. Not miscommunication. Not confusion. Bias. He requested mandatory training for airport officers on child trafficking indicators, racial profiling, and listening to civilian reports before dismissing them. Ruiz signed his own statement too. So did the gate agent. The airport did not become perfect because one man admitted he was wrong, but one locked door opened, and sometimes justice begins that quietly. Naomi missed her flight to Chicago that day. The court rescheduled her hearing after Agent Grant personally explained why. 3 weeks later, Naomi arrived in that courthouse with Isaiah's photograph in her folder and a new letter of recommendation from a federal investigator who wrote that Naomi Carter had saved a child because she refused to be silent when silence was easier. Daniel saw Grace 2 days after the rescue. She was older, fragile, and wrapped in a hospital blanket, but the crescent mark near her eye was still there. When she heard his voice, she reached for his hand. Neither of them spoke for a long time. They did not need to. At the airport, Gate E-17 returned to normal. Flights boarded, suitcases rolled, coffee cooled in paper cups, and strangers hurried toward their own lives. But near the family assistance room, Daniel paused every morning before his shift. He looked at the place where Naomi had sat beside Lily and remembered the lesson that had cost almost too much to learn. Kindness is not weakness. It is the courage to see someone clearly when the world has already decided not to. And sometimes the person with no badge, no title, and no power is the only one strong enough to tell the truth in time. If you had been standing in that airport, would you have listened to Naomi before the proof appeared, or would you have waited until it was almost too late?